Hello, everybody. Welcome to another webinar by Calibration Marketing. Today, we're joined by a great team of individuals across a multitude of areas within upper limb, both on the manufacturing and engineering side, as well as clinical. And we're scattered all around the world. So I'll take a minute to just go through what calibration marketing is, and then we'll introduce all of our guests and start to go through a lively conversation about upper limb prosthetics, all the changes that are going on in the market, all the consolidations, and what it really means, and does it really mean anything? So calibration marketing was started with the goal of supporting smaller entities, clinics, to fill the gap of the need for marketing and sharing that story, that user story, the clinic story, whatever the real why is for that entity. And also understanding that most of these smaller businesses don't have the capacity to bring on a full-time marketing person or personnel. And so the goal with calibration marketing is that we support you through project work or part-time or whatever the case is. So we're here to kind of bridge that gap between not having any marketing support, but also getting the job done, or just having a friendly conversation and helping you understand that you can do it on your own. So reach out if you need any support. But with that, into the meat of this conversation, I will introduce first and foremost James from Tasca. Thanks for joining us. It's super early for you, so we appreciate you being on today.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, absolutely. It's just past 6 a.m. over here in Australia. So yeah, early morning, and excuse any yawns that I might have coming through.
You'll have to tell us what happens tomorrow.
Absolutely.
If you could share a little bit about your role within Tasca and some of the things that you've been involved in. Obviously, you've kind of done a lot of trips throughout the U.S., visited a number of clinics. Obviously, you guys are distributed by Fill Hour. Just share a little bit about that so that anybody that's listening in can learn a little bit more if they don't know already.
Mm-hmm. So my name's James. Yeah, I've been with Tasca for nearly 6 years now. So I joined up shortly after we launched, actually. So that was my first foray into the O&P industry.
Okay.
So I've been involved in a number of projects over the time. When I first started, we had barely hitting 10 people, and now we've grown a lot bigger since then. So I started really working with Fill Hour to bring Tasca technology to the rest of the world in the USA, North America. We then expanded in through Europe as well, and also launched here in Australia. So yeah, we've been really growing since, and I've been supporting that whole journey. Doing a lot of travel internationally, as you say. Yeah.
Yes. And as for those that may have heard some of my previous webinars, I'm always looking at you guys to see what the next cool thing within marketing and how to tell the story is. So always excited to have you guys on. So thank you. Ted, I should just make you a regular on these webinars.
Well, yeah, perhaps.
But you're a very important part within upper limb prosthetics. So share a little bit about that.
Much. So yeah, my background, I was before prosthetics, I was in car design, and actually got into prosthetics completely by accident, thinking the job at Steeper was actually a local car company that I was going to apply for. So it was very much a surprise, and I was very lucky to get involved as they started developing the bionic hand, and kind of was hooked straight away. It's really exciting work. All the way through the bionic sort of development program, making them stronger, smaller, all the way up to 2017, where the products went over to Otto Bock. At that point, I founded Covey and spent another 4 years developing that product. So slightly unfortunate with the pandemic and the name. Quite challenging to be selling a hand in markets that were all closed down and nobody wants to go into a hospital, and so quite challenging. So 2021 kind of went back to my engineering roots, and we were making actuators for other healthcare applications, and I've gradually got back into prosthetics. Done a little bit of work for the NHS in the UK for products for children, and that's effectively developed into a product specializing in children, smaller sort of men and ladies as well. So in addition to that, that's Rebel Bionics, and then in addition to that, we've looked at the problem of people having access to trying myoelectronics, and we've developed a sort of a low cost toy effectively, that the Myo Rocket, which enables people to try out and effectively prove that they can they have the myo signals to drive any myoelectric hand.
Yeah, and obviously you guys are both here because there is so much innovation coming out of both of Tasca and now Cogent America / Rebel Bionics / Myo Rocket. There's so much there are so many needs that are being addressed and so much feedback from the users that has been gathered to obviously make this next generation of products. So thanks for joining us. I know for you, it's late. So, but now we'll go a little bit more stateside. I'm super excited that Jerry's here. I've tried to get you on here for a while, so I'm glad that you were able to join me. Obviously, we all know you, but if you could share a little bit more about your background. You've been around the block for a little while, but maybe there's some listeners that are new users, new to this whole world that we feel is super small. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I started my career as a mechanical engineer. I worked for a surgical instruments company before attending Northwestern as a career changer in 1991. And then I came back as a teacher at Northwestern and taught it there for a little bit, and then Georgia Tech, and then worked for Hosmer, Motion Control, Phil Auer, Autobach. And so I've kind of got to be able to see a wide scan of upper limb. And I guess in my later years, I've been studying clinical decision making. And so trying to understand what makes a specialist or expert, how are they a little bit different than a novice or intermediate? And that's been kind of interesting because there's a difference between what people think that they know and what they know. And the reasons that upper limb by nature can be somewhat more challenging. I've been interested in that. And how does this imprint on the patient, regardless of what type of component you're using? So that's been kind of interesting for me.
Yeah. You've obviously been doing a lot of research in a lot of areas within O&P. Even fatigue and just mental health and that sort of thing, which is important.
It's interesting to go from really being the person who helped design those things, leading teams, but then really getting into how that interacts with the patient. And then also, how does the prosthetist help or sometimes inhibit the acceptance of that prosthesis? The thing that's really humbling is we have the same rejection rates that we had in 1958. What?
Oh, yikes.
And so that was kind of a gut punch to me. And I want to know why that is. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about some of it. So, and last, but most certainly not least, Carl Lindborg. You should also be a regular.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So I'm going to hide this little slide just so we can see more of everybody, but share a bit about your background and how you got into this. Obviously, we've crossed paths at Touch Bionics and the No Sir, and have worked together since and just stayed in touch. But if you could add a few cents about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So my introduction to prosthetics and orthotics was in 1979, and I was asked if I wanted to be a technician. And I was one of those guys that had no college career goals at the time. And I wanted to be a fine furniture maker and make commissioned furniture. And after my first winter in a closed garage, putting glue on a laminate and getting high from that glue, I said, this is not what I signed up for. So I got into the prosthetic arena and got high on the acrylic resins and all of the lamination materials that we used back in the day. So I fell in love with upper limb prosthetics in 1983 when I went to Duderstadt, Germany. I was touring Europe on my bicycle, and I said, hey, let me go to Autobach and see how they make their components. And I got to the upper limb lab. I remember it was upstairs, and I fell in love with that. And I said, boy, I want to do this. But it wasn't until 2007 that I could really focus on upper limb. That during that first 30 years, I learned all of the other prosthetic and orthotic techniques. I became a clinician in 1993, and I worked in the VA. I worked at private clinics, and then I got this great opportunity to work for this company out of Scotland that had this multi-articulating hand, and I convinced them to hire me because they needed to have some sort of a knowledge of how to sell this product in the US. Because, if you look at the representation here on this call, Autobach, Tasca, and Cogent are all European countries. And so how do you sell this product in the US? So I worked with them for about 9 years. 2018, I went on to consulting, and now I do a variety of things. Upper limb is my passion, and I teach a few courses that teach techniques, but most of what I'm doing right now, coincidentally, is in catastrophic care management and helping manage complex cases that are involved in both lower and upper limb prosthetics. That's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, certainly a well-rounded background. And I know you've been involved on the payer end as well. So I think it's a nice segue to talk a little bit about kind of the trajectory and bringing these products to market from a manufacturer's and engineering side. James, obviously, Tasca has been around for a little while. And you just came on the scene and made a big splash with your waterproof features. And it was only one size at the time. And honestly, I think it was until last year, I did not even realize that your hands were not touchscreen compatible because I was so wowed by everything else. So it's, kudos to the things that you did focus on that addressed user needs that others in the field were not able to achieve yet. And obviously, Ted, you're really trying to be rebellious with this new hand that you're bringing to market and address an unmet need within that population of smaller hands and younger users. If you could share a little bit about why do you see it's obviously a challenging area to address, but how did you get to this? It's not just, hey, we woke up and we decided that we need smaller hands to make sure that all populations within the market are addressed. And what are some of the things that you've heard while you've been traveling around, both of you guys, that have kind of driven some of the innovation behind these two products?
So I think the adoption of myoelectronics is it's been quite interesting, where I've had people who have been told that they don't have suitable signals, and then quite quickly being able to set them up within 5 minutes, just with my experience. I'm not a clinician, I'm a mechanical engineer. So my coming back into prosthetics has been letting people have as much access as possible. And there's been a few things where when people are learning is in their childhood, but with the products that we have on the market at the moment, they're not really suitable for everyday use. I've chatted to kids who are using prosthesis and then they take it off and go and play. And I was thinking, we need something that's strong enough that they can go and play with it. And it can also be used for effectively, it's not to be frightened of, but it can be cleaned, it can be washed, it can be, bits of it can go in the washing machine, it can put back together at home, not in the clinic. So it's a more of a garment rather than a something very expensive. Getting used is really important. So we did this research, and then we're thinking, how are we going to test this device? We're thinking we can't test it on children. So we sort of started reaching out to ladies who were users of myoelectric hands and explained what we're trying to do. And they were like, well, actually, we'd be quite interested in that. So that's kind of where this whole thing sort of snowballed from a small group of people who were in a user group for testing a kid's arm. It kind of then turned into a product for ladies and small gents, and then secondary we'll do the kids arm, because what we found was that the terminal device wasn't the main issue. It was the socket that was going to be the challenge. It was getting a socket light enough and adjustable enough that it could be adjusted over a 3-year period without having very expensive parts of it replaced or taking up a lot of clinical time just on the upkeep. So that's effectively how this whole thing started again. Yeah,
and it's obviously we talked a little bit about it beforehand, but the socket fit is obviously critical. And Jerry, jump in whenever. But James, I'm curious about your Tasca's trajectory within this space, and from where you started with that one I guess at this point, large size, and what was the feedback that I'm assuming somewhere on the product roadmap there was a need to develop smaller sizes. There typically always is, but how did that kind of transpire?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, when we first came out years ago, we did the research for a start and realized that the gap that was there for users was having a prosthesis that's reliable, that they can confidently use in a range of environments. So for us, the key things were robustness and waterproofing. And there's a bunch of other features that we added in there too, but those were really the two ones that we realized if we can bring this into a multi-articulating hand, we're going to make a huge difference for a large number of people. And that was really the philosophy we went with. And this is one of the challenges in manufacturer. To add these, it's complex to design a waterproof hand. It's complex to bring in shockproofing and all these other features in there, our clutches that slip when you overload them. All these things are hard, and that's why we started with a large size and a large size only, is because it was challenging enough to bring all this stuff into the shape of a hand. But then to make that even smaller, that took a number of years and more development. So, I mean, that was really what happened is we introduced that large hand, made a huge difference to a lot of people. I mean, for the first year, we were struggling to meet orders. It was so popular, and we're a small company starting, and the demand was huge. So that expanded again. Right? It's still a problem, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So that continued. We made a medium size as well, added some new features. But last year, this is one of the benefits about being a company that's been in market for some time, is we were able to learn a lot of stuff from our large and medium hands. And so when we brought out that CX hand, we managed to basically redesign the platform and add in some of these features you mentioned, like the touchscreen compatibility, and bring it into a beautiful new size. So we could take all those features, shrink them down, and bring it into a natural looking form as well. Newer motors, sleeker motors, technology is evolving all the time. So we introduced some of those features. I mean, that's really Tasca's journey, is really focus on those core needs, which is that reliability, waterproofing. How many times a day do you wash your hands?
Yeah.
I hope it's at least once. Ted mentioned hygiene and that side of things. It's really important. So we kept that going through all the hands, and then just kept on adding and expanding to that envelope. Yeah.
And it's the waterproof and the hand washing alone. That's what I think really made the splash when you guys first came out. Everybody went, oh my God. And just the fact that you addressed it in such a way, instead of talking about it, you showed it. And everybody went, well, obviously, but we don't know how. So from a, now switching hats, from a clinical perspective, there's obviously all this engineering and thought and feedback that goes into developing these types of products. Something that is talked about often too is PDAC approval and all the L codes that are out there. But the reality is that, having tried to go through the process myself previously, really all that's cared about is, well, especially for the L6880, is it a multi-articulating myoelectric hand with individual motors? Okay, great. That's really all that's considered. In terms of all these additional features of waterproofing and all the other electronics and how fast, or, you know, whatever that whiz bang feature is kind of almost a throwaway. So part of it is the coding is a bit antiquated, and it's tough for smaller startups to really do anything about that. How challenging is it from an insurance and a clinical perspective to look at all these multi-articulating hands out there and prescribe them and get them reimbursed? And what are some of the other challenges that are that you guys face from a clinical perspective when somebody wants a myo hand, and hopefully can get it, or maybe sometimes not? I know it's a big question.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that what the language you're using. So I'm an engineer, and yet I'm a clinician and administrator, I guess. And so when you see people developing the codes, these are not necessarily technical people. These are people trying to maximize the amount of value they're getting. And then an engineer is the one who develops the technology. So it's really not a library like comparison. So that's the issue.
Yeah.
I think I'm always a proponent of keep pushing the technology moving forward, and then the coding system will catalog it and catch up. But we cannot wait to innovate. We must continue to innovate, and yet we must demonstrate value. And we do this. One of my friends that's a clinician said, well, how do I show that what I've done is better? There's a whole bunch of outcomes that you can utilize to demonstrate that, and, you know, actually show how this device is better, as well as get the story of the patient and tell that narrative very well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think, Jerry, previous, when we were talking before we went live, we were talking about just making sure that the clinicians know what technology is available. And, you know, there's a huge rejection rate in these upper limb prosthetic devices. And how do we keep each, you know, I was just writing down, there's 7-8 different hands on the market since the iLim came out. And even before that, if you consider the Michelangelo hand a multi-articulating hand, you know, there's a whole new group of people that have entered the market. And I remember when Tasca and B-Bionic started knocking on the door of what iLim was doing. And that was a very interesting time, because Tasca and B-Bionic were doing things, making adjustments to what the iLim hand was. iLim hand couldn't make changes as quickly as the new product was. Right. And now we got new folks like the Zeus hand and the, you know,
Adam's hand.
So, and all of them, when you start looking at how, what is the structure of those hands, some of them require you to manually position the thumb. Some of them automatically position the thumb. Some of them have the ability to have breakaway digits or a flexi grip. And yet none of those things, when we were putting the code, I was involved with getting the 6880 code. And at that time, we were very interested in making it product specific or manufacturer specific. And now it's not supposed to be manufacturer specific. And so how does Tasca and how does all of these new players cater to the US coding market? This might be a whole different conversation if you are doing this from England or Sweden or Australia, Linda. But you know, US has a very unique challenge in the way we provide prosthetic devices because of the coding system.
Yeah.
Well, it comes down to like what you consider as specifications as an engineer, which is mimicking the physiologic speed, providing the functional grip strength, positioning and control, rigidity of the fingers, and grip options. None of these are L codes.
Right. Exactly. And that's it's something that Carl and I have talked about offline as well, that, you know, there's all this excitement and the technology, as you said earlier, Jerry, we can't stop innovating just because there's this hindrance. We have to keep going. So what does that really mean for the industry?
So for instance, when there was a code desired for waterproof, right? One of the question was from the group was, where is the waterproofness? And okay, well, as an engineer, it's all throughout. But they wanted them to point to it. If you can't point to it, then it doesn't have a code. Those are the types of things that are the paradox of who you're talking to.
Interesting. Yeah. A great question just came in about, from a clinical perspective, how do you make the right choice for the particular hand for the particular user?
So specialists and experts and novices and intermediates make that decision differently.
Sure.
Very differently, actually. That's one of the things. But basically, it's by the level of gadget tolerance of the patient, comfort level of the patient, and then basically their expectations. Finally, it's the availability of training. And these are varying amounts to what the patient wants or desires. We as the clinician have to actually kind of balance those. So if I have someone who says, I want to go out and bale hay, maybe I'm not right away thinking multi-articular hand, right?
Sure.
He's going to be able to do that for his office work, but maybe he needs something a little bit more functional. So if I choose the wrong patient for the wrong design, I can't blame the engineers.
Well, and you know, one of the things that I see, and this is probably something that James and Ted can comment on as well, when you're a company that only provides external powered prosthetic components, you're really not looking at the full spectrum of what an injured worker, what a veteran, what the end user may need. You may have to start out and find out that a body-powered prosthesis is the best option at the moment. And you know, what do you do first? External powered or body powered? Typically, in the payer world, there is a protocol that's followed. And I think with Google searches and injured workers, amputees, end users coming in with what they saw on the latest TikTok or YouTube video, they don't have a full spectrum of what their life is going to be like going forward, because they want their hand back. They lost their hand, they want their hand back. So those are other challenges that we have.
Yeah.
I think we also have a challenge with the marketing and the perceived what the capability of these products are. They look amazing, but functionally they're not going to give someone their hand back, and not even close. It's a tool, and I don't think any of the companies we're marketing it. Task could probably do the better job of all the companies at the moment, giving it task-specific marketing. Whereas I think we were, especially in the early days, we were really guilty of it being like a Terminator. You know, this. I once got asked by a journalist how many people have elected to have this hand, have an amputation for this hand with a sound hand. I was like, none. And no, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not a sensible option. So I think we're all responsible, and it's all got to be a bit education. But if everyone else is saying, this is amazing, look at this, it's difficult not to get swept along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where, like, as you say, Ted, authenticity in marketing is absolutely key in upper limb. If you've got someone who's expecting a hand to function like a regular hand, and you've seen that from your marketing, then it's up to the OT and the clinician to bring them back to reality, which is a challenging job. So, I mean, that's one of the things that Task has always been adamant about, is we need to be authentic. We need to be realistic. We have a lot of images on the website of people using hands in workshop environments. That's because they can be used in workshop environments. They're successful there, and it's a great way of getting people back to work as well. So again, authenticity is key.
Mm-hmm.
One of my pet hates, and I've mentioned it to Linda before, is there's lots of videos of people doing things with bionic hands, and then you only know that it's clearly not on a person because they've got too much articulation in the wrist, and it's been held in a demo tower that's off camera, and you go, wow, that's amazing, you can do all this, and then you go, well, actually look at how much that wrist is rotating. That is impossible. You're never going to do it, and you're not going to be able to do it that quickly either. And I think things like that are they cause problems for everyone.
And yet there is a desire for the hands, and that's one thing I've been trying to understand. There is a cognitive connection between something that looks like a hand and the brain, and when it sees things and it begins to do this kinesthetic projection. So part of it is, it's the interaction of it, but the mind accepting that extension of themselves. So I think that's what they're seeking, and why there's been so much interest in it. When there's a tool, when it's a wrench, when it's even a hook, sometimes that's disrupted a little bit. And I think, there are limits to what we can do in terms of engineering and controls and mechanisms and materials in that small space. But we're moving forward because people desire it.
And I think also that, in the work that I've done with this catastrophic care management, it's not a question of either or, a body powered or an external powered. It's a question of which one provides the function for the task. And we know that there are limitations to both the external powered and the body powered. And so clinically, we need to make sure that we're setting and explaining that clearly, and that in some instances, no prosthesis at all may be what makes that person function better for a specific task.
And there's an ethical question too, Carl. When a person wants something for their arm or hand, that's what they want for their arm or hand, and whether or not they can afford it, that's a different question. But ethically, we don't tell people, like with knees, you'd be better if you just got a knee fusion. We say, well, here are different options for articulated knee. Of course, it is a different situation, but I always think about that, right? Ethically, why do we offer people those types of choices?
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to, I think we touched on it. It goes to the question that was posed about how do you know what to prescribe, what to suggest?
Of course, we don't prescribe, we recommend.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. But it's also that knowledge of what is out there. And again, we talked about this offline a little bit earlier, that in most cases, if it's not an upper limb specialist clinic, you don't see a whole heck of a lot of upper limb cases, and you may not be as well versed in everything that is available. And you may just go after, whatever you're most comfortable with, or what you have fit a few times, and this is the task that it'll perform. And I've had conversations with users that have been in those situations where they were just given something because that's what was most comfortable to the clinician. And maybe it wasn't the best solution for them. Or the user asked for something and fought for something that they really wanted, but ultimately it's not the right tool because it's a hammer and they need a wrench.
And this is what's so interesting, is that the clinician is imprinting on the patient, right? And so what the comfort level of the clinician is, and they may not be that confident. They're only on average seeing 2.3 patients per year. So If they're not that confident, they imprint this on the patient. And is it any wonder that the acceptance rates are still relatively low?
You know, I was going to say that often one of the sayings I say is that as clinicians, as prosthetists, we often hang the all of the justification for what we are recommending on our opinion, and yet we've got a great OT that's out there that can help get us and help align expectations. You know, and getting that person trained is a challenge. But if you look at look at what Touch Bionics or OSER did, you know, we absolutely took the model that Arm Dynamics and Autobach had at one point, where you have occupational therapists on staff and you train them for all of the scenarios that are going to be required for the prosthesis. Because I think we as clinicians, as prosthetists, we can't just be device makers anymore, especially in upper limb. We have to educate ourselves, get knowledgeable insight, join Skills for Life for those bilateral cases, talk to experts that know the different scenarios that are going to happen. Because if you're only doing this 2 times a year, you're gonna repeat the same mistake every time.
Yeah, and I know we could talk about all of this for hours on end, because there's so many different avenues to discuss. I'll address this one last question from those that are listening, and it's one that I'm curious to ask everybody of their unique opinions, and I think they may all be different, and I think that's where the value is, because that's how things are thought through from an engineering and a clinical standpoint. But the question is that, obviously, as we all know, there are more and more manufacturers, but nobody has found the holy grail, since, as I think we mentioned, that the rejection rate is pretty high for upper limb.
About 70% below the elbow, that's 70% acceptance. Above the elbow, it's about just around 60, and then 35% at the shoulder.
Yeah, which is astounding.
And not changed since 1958.
Yeah, which is also crazy. And
but the question is, what is the holy grail?
Yeah,
what do you define
missing?
it? And that's the thing. What do you define it as a person that uses it? That grail is different from person to person.
Totally fair. Yeah, I think I'm curious from the feedback maybe that's been received in the travels that James and Ted have done throughout the US, specifically because that's the market that we're talking about. What do you, without revealing any grand secrets of what, is still on the product roadmap and things like that, what has been addressed with maybe the CX hand from Tasca? Obviously, the Rebel hand will be shown a little bit more at OT World as you kind of plan those next steps out. But we touched on it a little bit. But what are the do not pass go type things at this point that you feel like, without addressing those, this is what we keep hearing over and over again?
So from the feedback we've got, reliability is really one of the key things. So imagine you've got your hand for the first time and you're starting to get trained, you're starting to use it. And 1 month, 2 months in, you've got to send it back to the shop to get it repaired. And that cycle continues. This is the sort of thing that can't happen, because that ultimately leads to issues and rejection. So from our perspective, reliability is really one of the things to hone in on. And, you don't expect your natural hand to be breaking down all the time and having to get that repaired. It should be the same for your prosthesis. And that's, from what we've heard, that's one of the main reasons for rejection in a lot of cases. So that's one of the things we're focused on.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, that's why people prefer those hooks for a lot of what they're doing.
Functional terminal devices. Yeah.
Terminal devices. Yes. and socket fit and all. I mean, there's so much we could also address in terms of why those rejection rates are high. And I think we talked about earlier, it's not always the fault of that device. Sometimes it's other things further up the line that the manufacturer can't solve necessarily.
Yeah. Well, as Jerry said, it's also about applying the right device to the right application, which is the role of the prosthetist as well, and in conjunction with the patient. And that was one of the reasons we aimed to expand that envelope. So having that reliable waterproof hand that can be used in more environments.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think before you jump in, Ted, I think what you just said, James, also goes to that authenticity. What does the user, who I think is nowadays more prone and more educated about this vast landscape in some cases, what are they seeing? And what do they think that the expectation is versus what the reality is? And too often it seems like it's this just magical journey of, oh my God, I'm going to be able to do all the things, which is just not realistic. And that great hand that you've developed may not be for them because it's not, because they are looking to, carry around hay bales every day. And so, Ted?
I was just going to say that I haven't got the Holy Grail, but I think some mechanism of try before you take it, like try it in a real environment and try to do the tasks with the device before you commit to it, and try different technologies. It's not different types of multi-articulate hands. You could try ETDs, you could try body powered, and have more time with the device before you say this is the one for me. And I think, I don't know how to do it because each has different socket technology and it's challenging, but aiming towards that I definitely would help. When people say, yeah, I can do this in my life, this helps, I'm going to use it.
Right. No, I think that's a great point, and trying to figure out how to simultaneously educate the user on what they do and don't like, kind of like doing an internship. You very quickly learn what you don't ever want to do. Like you did, Carl. You don't want to be sitting out in a cold garage doing woodworking. You should have the same opportunity to test out something that is going to be such a huge part of you. And Jerry and Carl, I don't know if you want to jump in on this. I know there's been a few questions, especially about the rejection rate, and maybe that's part of the answer of what is the Holy Grail.
It's actually a great question. Is what do you consider acceptance? In 1958, they said 12 hours of wear, continuous wear. Recent studies show that 68% of the patients really use their arm consistently about 4 hours from the time they wake up. For their first 2 meals, they dress, and then they take it off mid-afternoon. My question to you is, do you consider that acceptance? And that's really, some people would say yes, and some people would say, I don't know, no. So that is a big question, what you consider acceptance. Also, it's also the use that we just mentioned. What do you consider acceptance? Well, I had one patient that would not accept his limb until he was able to help change the diaper of his baby. That's really tough to do, and tough to do without any OT help. And I do think having a specialist help them, at least help you learn how to do it, is important, because I was gifted in that I had the chance to have all my students fit upper limb every semester. And then I would go to, and to be a consultant. So I had that. I was fortunate. But the thing is that having those repetitions is really what makes the difference. And it does make a difference in my confidence. In fact, specialists are much more accepting of what body power does than novices and intermediates. It's kind of interesting because they see it as just part of the continuum of functionality. They're not worried about will it work. They're worried more about how well will it work.
Interesting. Oh,
I've got a friend who I've met through the industry, and he's a bilateral user with 2 split hooks, and unbelievable. I worked with him, and I couldn't believe what he couldn't do. There wasn't anything he couldn't do. He did up an old truck. He did all sorts of stuff, and I was absolutely blown away. And like, he fitted a cable that his predecessor hadn't bothered fitting, and it was something like, I don't know, 3-4 meters in the air. And he'd done it without a ladder. And you're like, how did you do that? And he showed me how I did it. I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to steal that idea. He was amazing.
Yeah. Oh, Carl, thoughts on the Holy Grail or acceptance rates from your perspective and lack thereof?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I get to see, almost vicariously, I'm not in the treating room, but I get to see all of these different cases on the catastrophic care management side of the fence. And there's often things that we as prosthetists aren't aware of that are going on with this person besides the limb that they're missing. And there's some not all amputees are this way, but what appears in the mirror isn't always as close as it appears to be. I use that saying a lot because there's often things that, everybody wants their hand back, everybody wants their arm back, but they don't realize that there's no sensation in that hand. They don't realize that they have to tap into their nervous system and tell it to open. When you start getting up into the biceps and triceps for a higher level amputation, you're not opening and closing your hand to open that myoelectric hand. You're bending and extending your phantom elbow. There's a lot of these things that aren't explained to the end user. And the higher you go up, the more I think about this. You have to decide in the morning if you're an interscapular thoracic or a shoulder disarticulation, or maybe even a high level transhumeral. You got to get dressed first with the prosthesis and then put your clothes on, because you've got myoelectric contacts that have to meet your skin. So is it going to be more of a hassle for me to dress and then find out at noon I want to take it off? So I got to get undressed to take it off and then get dressed again. Those are things that didn't occur to me early on until I started seeing these decisions that the amputee had to make when they chose to wear the prosthesis or not. Those are things that it's like, wow, never thought about that.
And I think that goes back to the point of, the specialist versus the person that only sees a couple upper limb cases a year. And that's just, that the reality, I think, is that the majority is that part of the market.
One thing that's kind of funny is that people who are novices and intermediates think they could be a specialist if they just saw enough patients. But when I asked the specialists and experts, how did you become that way? They said they were always gifted with innovation. And so here's the thing. There are more novices and intermediates than specialists. So some of them started out thinking, I just need experience. And then as they learned, they said they've always been imbued with this greater knowledge of innovation. The thing is, the more times you do it, the better you get, the more confidence you project. Now, I do think there's one holy grail thing here, Linda, and that's communication. It's not technology necessarily. It's communicating with the patient about what they want, assessing those priorities. The specialists actually speak to 3.5 times more people than people who are just novices, meaning they're spreading the anxiety of the fitting out and they're getting support from them. So they're able to be better innovators. So the more you talk to people, the more you engage specialists, the more you talk to the patient, the more you talk to engineers, that's part of the holy grail right there. But that's something any of us can do.
Yeah. And there's no way I could be where I'm at and speak with the confidence I have if I hadn't spent 9 years on the road going to hundreds of different clinics, seeing how different clinics did things, learning from them how not to do it, and learning from them how to do it. That is very rare. And that's hard to have that user group or that clinician group. Who can you call? Who can you call?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great place to end this. We could keep going. And maybe we will. Maybe we'll do a piggyback off of this. But that is the true goal of all of these webinars, right? We don't necessarily have a horse in the race. It's just about having these open conversations and saying, here's what we've heard. Here's what, we've seen. because at least to me, and I did this when I was back at Brain Robotics, and some people said, well, why are you having other manufacturers on? That's crazy. At the end of the day, no one tool is going to answer the need for everybody and to allow them to do all the things. And so I think, again, to your point, Jerry, communication is key. And if we all collaborate more versus this us versus them mentality, the user, who is everybody's main goal, is only going to benefit. And the more all of us product and marketing and engineering speak with clinicians and spend time in those clinics and see this firsthand, the better the product will get and the better the messaging will get. And we're not going to say, well, you can walk around and smash your hand in a wall, because I have never done that personally. So thank you all for joining today. If there are any questions or anything, you can link in with all of these great individuals. We will do more webinars. There's one coming up at the end of the month, April 26th, with some users in this case, both upper and lower limb. So I invite anybody that's listening in today to join that webinar. But thank you, everybody. I know we went well over the halfway mark, but I think it was very worthwhile. I learned a number of things. So
thank you, Linda.
Thanks, guys.
What a great opportunity. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, everybody.
James.
All right.
Thanks, Carl.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.